Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his horse across the dusty Montana plains. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He had been riding fence lines all day, checking for breaks and loose posts on the Double R ranch where he worked. His faithful companion, a blue heeler named Ranger, trotted alongside his horse, tongue hanging out from the heat. Jake was 28 years old and had been working as a cowboy for nearly 10 years. He loved the freedom of the open range, the smell of leather and sage, and the simple life that came with ranch work. He wasn't much for towns or crowds, preferring the company of cattle and his dog to most people. Ranger had been with him for 5 years, ever since Jake found him as a puppy abandoned near a creek. The dog was smart, loyal, and had an uncanny ability to sense trouble before it happened. As they approached a small grove of cottonwood trees near the property line, Ranger suddenly stopped and let out a low whine. His ears perked up, and he looked toward the trees with intense focus. Jake pulled his horse to a halt and listened carefully. At first he heard only the wind rustling through the leaves and the distant sound of cattle lowing. Then he heard it too, a soft crying sound coming from the direction of the trees. Jake dismounted and followed Ranger, who was already heading toward the sound with his nose to the ground. They found a narrow creek running through the grove, and sitting on a fallen log beside the water was a young woman. She was hunched over, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Her long brown hair fell like a curtain around her face, and her clothes were dusty and wrinkled as if she had been walking for a long time. Ranger approached her slowly, his tail wagging gently. The woman looked up when she heard his footsteps, and Jake saw her face for the first time. She was probably in her early 20s, with kind green eyes that were red from crying. Despite her tears, Jake could see she was beautiful in a natural, understated way. She didn't seem afraid of Ranger, who had positioned himself protectively beside her. Jake removed his hat and approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked in his gentle voice. "I'm Jake Martinez. I work on the Double R ranch. This here's my dog, Ranger." The woman wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and tried to compose herself. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "I didn't mean to be on your property. I was just walking and got turned around. I'm Emma Thompson." Jake noticed she didn't answer his question about being all right, and he could see she was more than just lost. Her eyes held a deep sadness that spoke of real trouble. "You're not trespassing, Miss Thompson. This creek runs between several properties. Are you hurt? Do you need help getting somewhere?" Emma shook her head, but fresh tears started flowing. "I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted quietly. "I was supposed to get married today, but everything went wrong. I just started walking and couldn't stop." Jake felt his heart go out to her. He had always been a good judge of character, and something about Emma's genuine distress touched him deeply. Ranger seemed to sense her pain too, as he gently rested his head against her leg in a comforting gesture. "Well, you can't stay out here all night," Jake said practically. "It gets cold after dark, and there are coyotes and mountain lions in these parts. My boss's wife, Mrs. Rodriguez, runs a boarding house in town. She's a kind woman who would give you a safe place to stay while you figure things out." Emma looked up at him with surprise. She had expected him to tell her to move along or mind his own business. Instead, this cowboy was offering to help a complete stranger. "I don't have any money," she said honestly. "I left everything behind when I ran." Jake considered this for a moment. "Mrs. Rodriguez always needs help with cooking and cleaning. Maybe you could work for room and board until you get back on your feet. What do you say?" For the first time since he had found her, Emma managed a small smile. "You would do that for someone you just met?" "Ranger's a good judge of character," Jake said, patting his dog's head. "He likes you, so you must be good people. Besides, everyone deserves a helping hand when they're down." As they prepared to leave, Jake helped Emma onto his horse while he walked alongside, leading the animal back toward town. Ranger stayed close to Emma, as if he had appointed himself her guardian. During the ride, Emma gradually told Jake about her situation. She had been engaged to a man named Robert who seemed charming and successful. On their wedding day, she discovered he was already married to another woman and had been lying about everything. She had run from the church in her wedding dress, changed clothes at a friend's house, and just started walking with no destination in mind. Jake listened without judgment, offering occasional words of comfort. He found himself admiring Emma's courage in walking away from a bad situation, even though it left her with nothing. As they approached the town of Cedar Falls, Jake felt something he had never experienced before. There was something special about this woman that went beyond her obvious beauty. She had a strength and integrity that impressed him, and he found himself hoping she would stay in town long enough for him to get to know her better. When they reached Mrs. Rodriguez's boarding house, the elderly woman took one look at Emma and immediately ushered her inside, clucking sympathetically and promising hot food and a warm bed. As Jake prepared to leave, Emma turned to him with tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't know what would have happened if you and Ranger hadn't found me." Jake tipped his hat. "Just glad we could help, ma'am. I hope things work out for you." As he rode back to the ranch with Ranger trotting beside him, Jake couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious woman they had rescued. Something told him this was not the last time their paths would cross. 3 days passed before Jake saw Emma again. He had been thinking about her constantly, wondering how she was settling in at Mrs. Rodriguez's boarding house. Every time he came to town for supplies, he found himself looking for her, but their paths hadn't crossed. Ranger seemed to sense his master's distraction and would often look toward town when they were working the eastern pastures. On Thursday morning, Jake was loading feed bags at Murphy's General Store when he heard a familiar laugh. He turned to see Emma emerging from the store's back room, wearing a simple blue dress and carrying a broom. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there when he first found her by the creek. "Miss Thompson," Jake said, touching the brim of his hat. "Good to see you looking well." Emma's face lit up with a genuine smile. "Mr. Martinez, I was hoping I'd run into you. I wanted to thank you again for your kindness. Mrs. Rodriguez has been wonderful, and Mr. Murphy has given me work here in the store." Tom Murphy, the store owner, emerged from behind the counter. He was a round, cheerful man who had known Jake since he was a boy. "This young lady is a godsend, Jake. Best worker I've had in years. Smart as a whip, too. She figured out my inventory system in one day and found 3 errors I'd been carrying for months." Jake wasn't surprised. Even in their brief encounter by the creek, he had sensed that Emma was intelligent and capable. "That's wonderful news. How are you finding life in Cedar Falls?" "It's different from what I'm used to," Emma admitted. "I grew up in Denver, and this is the first time I've lived in a small town. But people are kind here. Mrs. Rodriguez treats me like family, and everyone has been welcoming." As they talked, Jake noticed several things about Emma that impressed him. She had a natural grace in how she moved and spoke, but there was nothing artificial about her. She asked thoughtful questions about ranch life and listened intently to his answers. When other customers entered the store, she excused herself politely and served them with genuine warmth and efficiency. "Would you like to see Ranger?" Jake asked when business slowed down. "He's been asking about you." Emma laughed, a musical sound that made Jake's heart skip. "Dogs don't ask about people, Mr. Martinez." "You'd be surprised," Jake said seriously. "Ranger's been moping around ever since we brought you to town. I think he's worried about you." They stepped outside where Ranger was waiting patiently beside Jake's horse. The moment he saw Emma, the dog's tail began wagging furiously. He trotted over to her and gently pushed his head against her hand, clearly remembering their first meeting. "Hello, boy," Emma said, scratching behind his ears. "You're such a good dog. Thank you for finding me that night." Jake watched the interaction with growing warmth. There was something magical about watching Emma with Ranger. The dog seemed completely at ease with her, and she had a natural way with animals that spoke to her character. "Mr. Martinez," Emma said suddenly, "I've been wondering about something. Why did you help me that night? Most people would have just told me to go to the sheriff or moved on." Jake considered her question seriously. "I suppose it was partly Ranger. He's got good instincts about people, and he took to you right away. But mostly you looked like someone who had been dealt a bad hand through no fault of your own. Everyone deserves a chance to start over." Emma's eyes grew soft. "You have a kind heart. Your parents raised you well." "My parents died when I was 12, Jake said quietly. I was raised by my uncle on a ranch in Texas. He taught me that how you treat people when they're down says everything about who you are. I'm sorry about your parents, Emma said with genuine sympathy. It sounds like your uncle was a wise man. He was. He used to say that the best judge of a person's character is how they treat animals and people who can't do anything for them in return. Emma was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about his words. That's a good philosophy. I wish more people lived by it. Their conversation was interrupted by Tom Murphy calling Emma back into the store to help with a customer. Before she left, she turned to Jake with a shy smile. Mr. Martinez, would you and Ranger like to join me for a picnic this Sunday after church? Mrs. Rodriguez makes the most wonderful fried chicken, and she always sends me with too much food. Jake felt his heart race. I'd like that very much, Miss Thompson. There's a nice spot by Miller's Pond if that suits you. That sounds perfect. I'll see you after church then. As Jake rode back to the ranch, he found himself whistling for the first time in months. Ranger trotted alongside with what Jake could swear was a satisfied expression on his canine face. That evening, Jake sat on the porch of the bunkhouse he shared with two other cowboys, brushing Ranger's coat and thinking about Emma. There was something special about her that went beyond her beauty. She had a strength and resilience that impressed him, but also a gentleness that drew him in, the way she had thanked him for his help without making him feel like a hero, the genuine interest she showed in his work, and her natural kindness to everyone she met. All of it painted a picture of a woman worth knowing better. The other cowboys, Bill and Carlos, noticed Jake's improved mood immediately. You're awful cheerful tonight, Bill observed. Find some gold in the creek bed? Something like that, Jake said with a grin. Carlos, who had been in town that day, laughed knowingly. Wouldn't have anything to do with that pretty new girl working at Murphy's, would it? Half the single men in town are already smitten with her. Jake felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy. Is that so? Don't worry, amigo, Carlos said with a wink. She turned down 3 invitations to the church social this weekend. Said she already had plans. Jake tried not to look too pleased, but Ranger's tail wagged as if he understood exactly what was happening. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Sunday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, gentle breeze, and the kind of warmth that made everything feel possible. Jake spent extra time getting ready, even asking Carlos to cut his hair the night before. He chose his best shirt. The blue one that Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned brought out his eyes and made sure his boots were polished to a shine. Ranger seemed to understand the importance of the day. He sat patiently while Jake brushed his coat until it gleamed, and he walked with unusual dignity as they made their way to the small white church in the center of Cedar Falls. Jake wasn't much of a churchgoer, but he had been attending occasionally since moving to Cedar Falls 2 years ago. Today, however, he found it difficult to concentrate on the sermon. He kept glancing toward the section where Emma sat with Mrs. Rodriguez and several other boarding house residents. She wore a simple yellow dress that made her look like sunshine, and her hair was arranged in soft waves that framed her face beautifully. After the service, Jake waited nervously outside the church while Emma gathered her picnic basket from Mrs. Rodriguez's buggy. Ranger stayed close to his side, sensing his master's anxiety. When Emma approached them, she was carrying a large wicker basket that smelled wonderfully of fried chicken and fresh bread. I hope you're hungry, Emma said with a warm smile. Mrs. Rodriguez was very excited about this picnic. I think she's trying to play matchmaker. Jake felt his cheeks warm.
She's a kind woman.
Always looking out for everyone. They walked together toward Miller's Pond, which was about a mile outside of town. Ranger trotted ahead, occasionally circling back to check on them. The conversation flowed easily between Jake and Emma as they walked. She asked about his work on the ranch, and he found himself telling her things he rarely shared with others. About his favorite horse, a paint mare named Stella, about the satisfaction of working with cattle, and about his dreams of maybe owning his own small spread someday. Emma listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and sharing her own experiences. She told him about growing up in Denver, where her father had been a banker and her mother had taught piano lessons. She had been educated at a finishing school, but confessed that she had always been more interested in practical skills than social graces. I scandalized my mother by insisting on learning to cook and keep house, Emma said with a laugh. She thought it was beneath our station, but I always believed a person should know how to take care of themselves. That's practical thinking, Jake agreed. My uncle taught me the same thing. Said a man who couldn't cook, mend, and clean was only half a man. When they reached Miller's Pond, Jake spread his saddle blanket under a large oak tree that provided perfect shade. The pond was a peaceful spot, with cattails growing along the edges and the occasional fish jumping to catch insects. Emma unpacked their lunch, revealing not just Mrs. Rodriguez's famous fried chicken, but also fresh biscuits, potato salad, pickled vegetables, and an apple pie that made Jake's mouth water. As they ate, Emma surprised Jake by asking about Ranger's training. "He's so well-behaved and intelligent. Did you train him yourself?" "Mostly," Jake said, offering Ranger a small piece of chicken. "He was already smart when I found him. I just helped him focus that intelligence. He can help move cattle, find lost calves, and he once warned me about a rattlesnake that I would have stepped on." "He saved your life," Emma said seriously, reaching over to pet Ranger. "Good boy." Ranger's tail wagged proudly, and he positioned himself between Jake and Emma as if he belonged with both of them. After lunch, they walked around the pond, talking about everything and nothing. Emma told Jake about her broken engagement, explaining more about how she had discovered Robert's deception. "I should have seen the signs," she said sadly. "But I wanted to believe in the fairy tale so badly that I ignored my instincts." "That's not your fault," Jake said firmly. "A man who would lie about being married is the worst kind of scoundrel. You're better off without him." "I know that now," Emma said, "but it made me question my judgment. How do you know when someone is genuine?" Jake thought about her question seriously. "I suppose you look at how they treat others, especially people who can't help them. You watch how they act when they think no one is looking, and you trust your instincts even when your heart wants something different." Emma stopped walking and looked at him intently. "What do your instincts tell you about me?" Jake felt his heart race, but he met her gaze steadily. "They tell me you're honest, kind, and stronger than you think you are. They tell me you have a good heart and that you deserve to be treated with respect and care." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more to me than you know." As the afternoon wore on, they found themselves talking about their dreams and hopes for the future. Emma confessed that she had always imagined living on a ranch, despite her city upbringing. "I love the idea of wide-open spaces and honest work. City life always felt so artificial to me." Jake shared his dream of saving enough money to buy his own land and raise cattle. "It wouldn't be much at first," he said. "Just a small place with good water and grass, but it would be mine." "That sounds wonderful," Emma said wistfully. "There's something appealing about building something from nothing, creating a life based on your own hard work." As the sun began to set, they packed up their picnic supplies and started the walk back to town. Ranger walked between them, occasionally bumping against their legs as if trying to push them closer together. When they reached Mrs. Rodriguez's boarding house, Emma turned to Jake with a shy smile. "Thank you for a perfect afternoon," she said. "I can't remember the last time I felt so at peace." "Thank you for the fine meal and even finer company," Jake replied, his hat in his hands. "I hope we can do this again soon." "I'd like that very much," Emma said. Then impulsively she leaned down and kissed Ranger on the head. "And thank you too, Ranger, for being such a good chaperone." As Jake rode back to the ranch with Ranger running beside him, he felt something he had never experienced before. For the first time in his life, he was falling in love, and it felt as natural and right as breathing. Ranger looked up at him with what Jake could swear was approval, as if the dog knew that their little family was about to grow by one very special person. The weeks following their picnic passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing affection. Jake found excuses to visit town more frequently, always with Ranger in tow. Emma would light up whenever she saw them coming, and the three of them began to feel like a natural unit. On Wednesday evenings, when the store closed early, they would take walks around town. On Saturdays, Jake would help Emma with errands, carrying heavy packages and ensuring she got home safely as darkness fell. Mrs. Rodriguez watched their courtship with keen interest and obvious approval. "That young man has marriage on his mind," she told Emma one evening as they prepared dinner together. "And you could do worse than a cowboy with honest work and a good heart." Emma blushed but didn't deny her growing feelings. Jake Martinez was unlike any man she had ever known. He was genuine in a way that Robert had never been, steady and reliable without being boring. When he looked at her, she felt seen and valued for who she truly was, not for what she could provide or how she looked in a pretty dress. One evening in late October, as autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors, Jake arrived at the boarding house looking troubled. Emma immediately noticed his worried expression and the way Ranger stayed close to his side, ears alert. "What's wrong?" she asked as they sat together on the front porch swing. Jake was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something difficult. "There's been some trouble at the ranch," he finally said. "Cattle rustlers hit us 3 nights ago. They got away with nearly 50 head of prime beef cattle." Emma's hand flew to her throat. "That's terrible. Were you hurt? Was anyone hurt?" "No one was injured, thank God. But Mr. Rodriguez is talking about hiring more men and riding patrol at night. It's going to be dangerous work." Emma felt her heart sink. She had lost one man to deception and lies. The thought of losing Jake to violence was almost unbearable. "Surely the sheriff can handle this." Jake shook his head grimly. "Sheriff Mason is a good man, but he's got more territory than he can cover with just 2 deputies. The rustlers know the country well and they're organized. This wasn't some desperate men stealing a few cows for food. This was planned and professional." "What will you do?" Emma asked quietly. "My job," Jake said simply. "Mr. Rodriguez has been good to me. I can't abandon him when he needs help. But Emma," he turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been wanting to say for weeks." Emma's heart began to race. In the lamplight from the boarding house windows, Jake's face was serious and tender at the same time. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. You make me want to be a better man, to build something lasting and good." Tears sprang to Emma's eyes. "Oh, Jake, I love you too. I was so afraid to admit it, even to myself, after what happened with Robert." Jake reached up to gently wipe away her tears. "I'm not Robert, Emma. I would never lie to you or hurt you intentionally. But I need you to know that these rustlers make my work more dangerous than it was before. I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to me without you knowing how I feel." Emma threw her arms around his neck, not caring who might see them. "Don't talk like that. Nothing is going to happen to you." "I won't let it." Jake held her tightly, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "I have something else to tell you," he said softly. "I've been saving money for 3 years now, putting aside every penny I could spare. I have enough to make a down payment on the Patterson place, that small ranch about 10 miles east of here. Old man Patterson wants to move to California to live with his daughter." Emma pulled back to look at him with surprise. "You're buying a ranch?" "I'm going to try. If the bank will give me a loan for the rest, I'll have my own place by spring. It's not much, just 160 acres with a small house and barn. But the water rights are solid and there's good grazing land." "That's wonderful, Jake. You'll be your own boss." "The house needs work," Jake continued, his eyes searching her face. "It's been empty for 2 years and it's rough around the edges. But with some elbow grease and care, it could be a real home. Emma, what I'm trying to ask is, would you consider being my wife? Would you help me build something together?" Emma felt her heart soar with joy and terror at the same time. This was so different from Robert's proposal, which had been all about fancy words and expensive rings. Jake was offering her a partnership, a chance to build a life based on love and honest work. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Jake Martinez, I will marry you." Jake's face broke into the biggest smile Emma had ever seen. He stood up and spun her around right there on the porch, both of them laughing with pure happiness. Ranger barked excitedly as if he understood that something wonderful was happening. When Jake set her down, they were both breathless and grinning. "I don't have a ring yet," he said apologetically. "I wanted to wait until I was sure about the ranch." "I don't need a ring," Emma said firmly. "I need you." They were interrupted by Mrs. Rodriguez bursting through the front door, her face beaming with delight. "Did I hear what I think I heard?" she demanded. "We're engaged," Emma said, still feeling dazed by the speed of events. Mrs. Rodriguez immediately began fussing over them, insisting they come inside for coffee and cake to celebrate. Word spread quickly through the boarding house, and soon Emma found herself surrounded by well-wishers and advice givers. Later that evening, as Jake prepared to ride back to the ranch, he pulled Emma aside for a private moment. "Are you sure about this?" he asked seriously. "Ranch life is hard work, and with the rustling problem, there could be danger." Emma looked at this good, honest man who had rescued her from despair and offered her a chance at real happiness. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she said firmly. We'll face whatever comes together. Jake kissed her then, a gentle, promising kiss that sealed their commitment to each other. Ranger wagged his tail approvingly, as if he knew that his two favorite people in the world had just decided to become a family. As Emma watched Jake and Ranger disappear into the darkness, she felt a mixture of joy and worry. She was engaged to the most wonderful man she had ever known, but the threat of the rustlers cast a shadow over their happiness. She said a silent prayer for Jake's safety and for their future together, then went inside to begin planning the next chapter of her life. November brought an early winter to Montana, with snow dusting the mountains and frost covering the grass most mornings. Jake's work became more demanding as he and the other ranch hands took turns riding night patrol, watching for signs of the rustlers who had already struck twice more in the area. Emma worried constantly, especially when Jake would arrive in town with dark circles under his eyes from too many sleepless nights. The danger became real on a cold Tuesday evening when Jake arrived at the boarding house with his left arm in a makeshift sling and a bandage on his forehead. Emma nearly fainted when she saw him, and Mrs. Rodriguez immediately began fussing over his injuries. "What happened?" Emma demanded, her voice shaking with fear and anger. "We caught them in the act," Jake explained as Mrs. Rodriguez cleaned his head wound. "4 men trying to drive off a dozen head from the north pasture. We managed to stop them, but not before shots were fired. I got thrown from my horse when she spooked at the gunfire." "You could have been killed," Emma said, her eyes filling with tears. "But I wasn't," Jake said gently, reaching for her hand with his good arm. "And we sent those rustlers running. Sheriff Mason thinks they'll move on to easier targets now that they know we're watching for them." Despite Jake's reassurances, Emma couldn't shake her fear. That night she lay awake thinking about how quickly happiness could be snatched away. She had already lost one future to deception. She couldn't bear the thought of losing another to violence. The next morning brought unexpected news. Tom Murphy arrived at the boarding house early, his face grave with concern. "Emma," he said, "there's been a development you need to know about. A man came into the store yesterday asking about you. Said his name was Robert and that he was your husband." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing," Tom said firmly. "I don't like his type and something about him seemed off. But he's staying at the hotel and he's been asking questions around town. People are talking." Emma's hands began to shake. "He found me," she whispered. "He actually followed me here." Mrs. Rodriguez put a protective arm around Emma's shoulders. "That man has no legal claim on you, child. You never married him." "But what if he tries to cause trouble? What if he tells people lies about me?" Before anyone could answer, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Through the window, Emma saw Jake riding up with Ranger, but behind him came a well-dressed man on a rented horse from the livery stable. Even from a distance, Emma recognized Robert's arrogant posture and expensive clothes. Jake dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, his injured arm moving stiffly. Ranger immediately sensed tension and positioned himself protectively near his master. Robert climbed down from his horse with far less grace, his city clothes and polished boots marking him as clearly out of place in the rural setting. "Emma!" Robert called out as he approached the front porch. "There you are, my dear. I've been searching everywhere for you." Jake turned at the sound of the unfamiliar voice, his eyes immediately assessing the stranger. Emma stepped out onto the porch, her chin raised defiantly despite her fear. "I have nothing to say to you, Robert," she said firmly. "You have no business here." Robert smiled the charming smile that had once fooled her completely. "Now, Emma, don't be dramatic. I've come to take you home where you belong. This little adventure of yours has gone on long enough." "I am home," Emma said quietly. "And I'm not going anywhere with you." Robert's smile faltered when he noticed Jake standing nearby, his hand resting casually on his hip near his gun. The cowboy's stance was relaxed but alert, and there was something in his eyes that made Robert take a step backward. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Robert said, his voice taking on the condescending tone Emma remembered so well. "I'm Robert Blackwood, Emma's fiancé." "Former fiancé," Emma corrected sharply. and Jake Martinez is my current fiancé. We're to be married in the spring." Jake stepped forward, offering his good hand to Robert in a gesture that seemed polite, but carried an unmistakable warning. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand you've caused Miss Thompson considerable distress." Robert ignored the offered handshake, instead turning back to Emma with growing anger. "You can't be serious about marrying some ignorant cowboy, Emma. You were raised for better things than this primitive life." "How dare you?" Emma said, her voice rising with indignation. "Jake is worth 10 of you. He's honest, kind, and honorable, qualities you clearly know nothing about." "Honest?" Robert laughed bitterly. "Has he told you he's been in prison? Has he mentioned that he killed a man in Texas?" Emma felt her heart skip, but she looked at Jake's face and saw no guilt or deception there, only sadness. "Jake?" she said quietly. Jake's voice was steady when he spoke. "I was 17 years old, Emma. A drunk cowboy was beating a horse to death with a club. When I tried to stop him, he came at me with a knife. I defended myself, and he fell and hit his head on a rock. The jury called it self-defense, but I still spent 6 months in jail while they sorted it out." "He's a killer, Emma," Robert pressed. "Is that really the kind of man you want to marry?" Emma looked at Robert with disgust. "He defended an innocent animal from cruelty. That tells me everything I need to know about his character." She turned to Jake with love shining in her eyes. "I'm proud to marry a man who stands up for those who can't defend themselves." Robert's face darkened with rage. "You're making a mistake, Emma. This backwater town and this nobody cowboy. You'll regret throwing away your real future for this fantasy." "My only regret," Emma said coldly, "is that I ever believed your lies." Ranger had been watching the confrontation with growing tension, and when Robert took an aggressive step toward Emma, the dog moved between them with a low growl that made Robert stumble backward in fear. "I think it's time for you to leave," Jake said quietly, but his voice carried absolute authority. "Miss Thompson has made her feelings clear." Robert looked around at the faces watching from the boarding house windows, at Jake's steady gaze, and at Ranger's protective stance. He was clearly outnumbered and outmatched. "This isn't over, Emma," he said as he backed toward his horse. "You'll come to your senses eventually." "It was over the moment I discovered you were married to another woman," Emma replied with finality. As Robert rode away, Emma felt a tremendous weight lift from her shoulders. She turned to Jake with tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply. Jake pulled her into his arms with his good arm, holding her close. "No one will ever hurt you again, Emma. I promise you that." Ranger wagged his tail and pressed against their legs as if sealing the promise with his own loyalty. Emma knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had found her true home with these two devoted companions who would protect her with their lives. February 14th, Valentine's Day, dawned clear and bright with the kind of crisp winter air that made everything sparkle like diamonds. Emma woke early in the boarding house, her heart racing with excitement and nervous energy. Today she would marry Jake Martinez, the cowboy who had rescued her from despair and shown her what true love really meant. Mrs. Rodriguez had been up even earlier, preparing a wedding feast that would feed half the town. The smells of roasting beef, fresh bread, and spiced cakes filled the boarding house, creating an atmosphere of celebration that had everyone smiling. Emma's wedding dress, made from ivory silk that Tom Murphy had special ordered from Denver, hung ready beside her simple traveling outfit for their brief honeymoon. Across town at the hotel, Jake was having his own struggle with pre-wedding nerves. He had borrowed a proper black suit from Mr. Rodriguez, and Carlos had helped him with his tie 3 times before getting it right. Ranger seemed to sense the importance of the day and sat perfectly still while Jake brushed his coat until it gleamed. "You clean up pretty good for a cowboy," Carlos teased as Jake checked his appearance in the mirror for the 10th time. "I want to look worthy of her," Jake said seriously. "Emma deserves the best of everything." The wedding was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the little white church with Pastor Williams officiating. By 1:30, most of the town had gathered, filling the wooden pews and spilling out onto the front steps. Emma had quickly become beloved in Cedar Falls, and everyone wanted to witness her marriage to their favorite cowboy. Jake stood at the front of the church with Pastor Williams, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. Ranger sat beside him in perfect behavior, wearing a blue ribbon around his neck that Mrs. Rodriguez had insisted upon. The dog seemed to understand his important role as unofficial best man. When the church doors opened and Emma appeared on Tom Murphy's arm, Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. She was absolutely radiant, her face glowing with happiness beneath the simple veil Mrs. Rodriguez had worn at her own wedding 30 years earlier. The ivory dress fit her perfectly, elegant but practical, exactly what Jake would have expected Emma to choose. As Emma walked down the aisle, her eyes were fixed on Jake's face and she felt her heart overflow with love and gratitude. This good, honest man had saved her in every way a person could be saved. He had given her safety, respect, love, and a future filled with purpose and partnership. When Tom placed Emma's hand in Jake's, the older man whispered, "Take good care of her." "Son, with my life," Jake promised solemnly. Pastor Williams began the familiar words of the marriage ceremony, but Jake and Emma were lost in each other's eyes, speaking their own silent vows of love and commitment. When it came time for their spoken promises, Jake's voice was strong and clear. "Emma, I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to work hard to build a good life for us and to always treat you as the precious gift you are." Emma's voice was soft but unwavering as she made her own vows. "Jake, I promise to love you, support you, and stand beside you through whatever life brings. I promise to make our house a home and to be your faithful partner in all things." When Pastor Williams asked for the rings, Ranger stood up and carefully carried the simple gold bands to his master in a small pouch tied around his neck. The congregation laughed delightedly at the clever trick Jake had taught his faithful companion. "With this ring I thee wed," Jake said as he slipped the band onto Emma's finger. His own ring, purchased with Emma's careful saving from her store wages, fit perfectly on his work-roughened hand. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Williams declared with a broad smile. "Jake, you may kiss your bride." Jake cupped Emma's face gently in his hands and kissed her with all the love and promise he felt in his heart. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause, and Ranger barked once in approval before resuming his dignified sitting position. The celebration that followed at the boarding house was joyous and heartfelt. Mrs. Rodriguez had outdone herself with the food, and someone had brought a fiddle for dancing. Jake and Emma shared their first dance as husband and wife, to a sweet melody that had everyone wiping away happy tears. As the evening wore on, Jake and Emma found themselves standing on the front porch of the boarding house, taking a moment of quiet together amid the celebration. Emma was still wearing her wedding dress, but she had traded her delicate shoes for practical boots, making Jake laugh. "No regrets?" he asked, pulling her close in the circle of his arms. "Only that we waited so long," Emma said, leaning into his warmth. "I love you, Jake Martinez." "I love you too, Emma Martinez," Jake said, savoring the sound of her new name. Ranger appeared beside them, as he always did, and Emma reached down to scratch behind his ears. "Thank you, boy," she said softly. "Thank you for finding me that night and bringing me home." The dog looked up at her with his intelligent brown eyes, his tail wagging slowly, as if he understood that his most important job was complete. He had brought his two favorite people together, and now they were a family. 2 weeks later, after a brief honeymoon at the Patterson Ranch, Jake and Emma took over Murphy's General Store while continuing to improve their ranch. Emma proved to have a natural head for business, and Jake's knowledge of the local ranchers and farmers made them a formidable team. The store prospered under their management, providing the steady income they needed while Jake built up his cattle herd. By summer, they had moved into the ranch house, which Emma had transformed into a warm and welcoming home. She planted the vegetable garden she had dreamed of, and Jake built her the flower beds she wanted along the front porch. Ranger appointed himself guardian of both the store and the ranch, dividing his time between town and country with the same dedication he had always shown. On warm evenings, Jake and Emma would sit on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors. Emma would often have mending in her lap or a book in her hands, while Jake whittled or planned improvements to their property. Ranger would lie at their feet, content in the knowledge that his family was safe and happy. One evening in late summer, As they sat watching the stars appear in the darkening sky, Emma placed her hand over her still flat stomach and smiled at her husband. "Jake," she said softly, "I have something wonderful to tell you." Jake looked at her face in the lamplight streaming from their window and saw a special glow in her eyes. Understanding dawned and his face broke into the biggest smile Emma had ever seen. "Really?" he whispered. "Really," Emma confirmed. "Our family is going to grow." Jake swept her into his arms, spinning her around on the porch just as he had the night they got engaged. Ranger barked excitedly, as if he too understood that something wonderful was happening. As they held each other under the Montana stars, surrounded by the life they had built together, Emma thought about the night Ranger had found her crying by the creek. She had been at the lowest point of her life, broken and lost, with no idea that her greatest happiness was just beginning. Now she was Mrs. Jake Martinez, co-owner of a thriving business, mistress of a beautiful ranch, and soon to be mother to the children who would carry on their love story. She had found her true home not in a place, but in the hearts of the man and dog who had saved her and chosen to love her unconditionally. Ranger, now graying slightly around his muzzle but still devoted and alert, settled down beside them with a contented sigh. His work was far from over. He would have new family members to watch over and protect. But for now, on this perfect summer evening, he was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by the love he had helped create and the family he had brought together through his faithful heart. December arrived with a fierce snowstorm that lasted 3 days and left the countryside buried under 2 feet of white. The rustling problem had indeed disappeared after the confrontation at the ranch, and Sheriff Mason confirmed that the gang had moved on to easier targets in another county. With the immediate danger past, Jake was able to focus on finalizing the purchase of the Patterson Ranch. Emma spent her evenings at the boarding house sewing curtains and linens for their future home, while Mrs. Rodriguez taught her traditional Mexican recipes that Jake loved. The older woman had taken it upon herself to prepare Emma for ranch life, sharing practical advice about everything from preserving food to treating injured animals. "A ranch wife must be strong and resourceful," Mrs. Rodriguez explained as they worked together in the kitchen, "but she must also know when to let her husband lead and when to stand beside him as an equal partner." Emma absorbed every lesson eagerly. She had grown up with servants handling domestic work, but she found genuine satisfaction in learning to cook, clean, and manage a household with her own hands. There was something deeply fulfilling about preparing food that would nourish the man she loved and creating a home they would share together. Jake's arm healed completely by mid-December, and he threw himself into preparing for his transition from ranch hand to ranch owner. Mr. Rodriguez had been generous, allowing Jake to purchase several head of cattle at cost and giving him a glowing recommendation to the bank. The loan approval came through just before Christmas, making their engagement official in the eyes of the community. On Christmas Eve, Jake surprised Emma by taking her to see their future home for the first time. The Patterson place sat in a sheltered valley with a clear creek running through it, and mountains rising protectively on 3 sides. The house was indeed rough around the edges, but Emma could see its potential immediately. "It's perfect," she breathed as they stood together in the main room, their breath visible in the cold air. Ranger explored every corner, his tail wagging with approval. "Are you sure?" Jake asked anxiously. "The roof needs repair, the floors need refinishing, and the kitchen needs a complete rebuild." Emma turned to him with shining eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything. We'll make it beautiful together." They spent the afternoon walking the property, Jake pointing out the best grazing areas and the spots where he planned to expand the barn and build corrals. Emma envisioned a vegetable garden near the kitchen, flower beds along the front porch, and maybe even some fruit trees if the climate allowed. "When can we move in?" Emma asked as they prepared to leave. "I was thinking we'd marry in March after the worst of winter is past," Jake said. "That will give us time to make the most necessary repairs and for you to finish your preparations." Emma agreed, though every day they spent apart felt like a waste of precious time. They had found something rare and wonderful together, and she was eager to begin their life as husband and wife. The weeks after Christmas passed quickly as they threw themselves into wedding preparations and house repairs. Jake spent every free moment at the new ranch, often working by lamplight to repair the roof and replace broken floorboards. Emma divided her time between the store, helping Mrs. Rodriguez plan the wedding feast, and sewing her wedding dress. In early February, unexpected news arrived that would change their timeline dramatically. Tom Murphy received a letter from his brother in California, begging him to come help with a family emergency. The brother's wife had died, leaving him alone with 3 small children and a failing business. "I have to go," Tom told Emma sadly, "but I hate to leave you without work, especially with the wedding coming up." Emma had been thinking about this possibility, and she had an idea that excited her. "What if Jake and I took over the store?" she suggested. "We could run it together after we're married." Tom's face lit up with interest. "You'd want to do that? It's hard work and the profits aren't huge." "It would be perfect," Emma said enthusiastically. "Jake knows everyone in the area, and I've learned the business from you. We could live above the store at first while we fix up the ranch house, then move out there once it's ready." When Emma presented the idea to Jake, he was immediately interested. Running a store would provide steady income while he built up his cattle herd, and it would keep Emma safely in town rather than isolated on the ranch. "It's a good plan," he agreed. "We could make a decent living from the store and use the ranch for raising cattle and horses. Best of both worlds." Tom was so relieved to have a solution that he offered to sell them the store at a price they could afford, with the money Jake had saved for ranch improvements. They would own both the store and the ranch, giving them security and options for the future. With their plans changed, they decided to move up their wedding date to early February. Emma was thrilled at the prospect of marrying sooner, and Mrs. Rodriguez threw herself into preparations with renewed energy. The night before their wedding, Emma sat on the front porch of the boarding house despite the cold, wrapped in her warmest coat and watching the stars. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the despair of discovering Robert's betrayal to the overwhelming joy of finding true love with Jake. Mrs. Rodriguez joined her with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Second thoughts?" she asked gently. "Not even one," Emma said firmly. "I'm just amazed at how much my life has changed in 6 months. If someone had told me last summer that I'd be marrying a cowboy in Montana, I would have thought they were crazy." "Life has a way of surprising us," Mrs. Rodriguez observed. "The heart knows what it needs even when the mind doesn't understand." As if summoned by their conversation, Jake appeared around the corner with Ranger at his side. He had been staying at the hotel since the engagement, observing proper decorum, but Emma suspected he had been walking past the boarding house most evenings just to be near her. "Ladies," he said, touching his hat brim. "Beautiful evening." "Jake Martinez, you should be getting your rest," Mrs. Rodriguez scolded. "Tomorrow is your wedding day." "Too excited to sleep," Jake admitted with a grin. "Besides, Ranger insisted on a walk, and somehow our feet brought us this direction." Emma laughed, her heart full of love for this good, honest man who would be her husband in less than 12 hours. Tomorrow would begin the greatest adventure of her life, and she couldn't wait to start.